The year is 1478, a stone chamber beneath the ducal palace in Milan. Water drips somewhere in the darkness, each drop echoing off walls that have absorbed screams for 3 generations. The smell hits you before your eyes adjust. Copper and rust and something else, something organic and wrong. The kind of smell that makes your body want to run before your mind understands why. A man named Giovanni Borromeo hangs suspended from the ceiling by his wrists, which are bound behind his back. He has been hanging for 6 hours, his shoulders dislocated within the first 20 minutes. That was the easy part. What comes next will take 3 days. And Giovanni, a minor clerk accused of stealing 12 florins from the treasury, will confess to crimes he never committed, implicate friends who are completely innocent, and beg for a death that will not come quickly. The torturer, a man named Abramo, who inherited this position from his father, who inherited it from his father before him, approaches with an instrument that looks almost medical in its precision. He has done this 437 times. He knows exactly how much pain the human body can endure before the mind breaks completely. He knows the precise moment when a man stops being a person and becomes simply meat that screams. And he knows that moment is still many hours away for Giovanni. What Abramo does not know, what he cannot know, is that archaeologists will discover this chamber 500 years later. They will find instruments so sophisticated in their cruelty that modern engineers will struggle to understand their full function. They will find bones with marks that tell stories of suffering so prolonged and systematic that forensic specialists will need therapy after completing their analysis. They will find records, meticulous records, documenting every session in detail that reveals medieval torturers understood human anatomy and psychology with terrifying precision. The medieval period was not an age of random brutality. It was an age of industrialized suffering, an age when the science of pain was studied and refined with the same dedication that scholars brought to theology or philosophy, an age when causing maximum agony while keeping victims alive for maximum duration was considered a professional skill worthy of family dynasties and guild memberships. Here is what you need to understand before we go any further. Everything you think you know about medieval torture is wrong. Not because it was less brutal than popular culture suggests, because it was worse. Systematically, scientifically, incomprehensibly worse. The devices you have seen in museums, the Iron Maidens and the racks and the thumbscrews, those were the simple tools, the common instruments used for everyday interrogation. What I am about to show you goes far beyond those familiar horrors into territory that medieval authorities themselves considered so extreme that records were often destroyed to prevent public knowledge. Tonight you will learn about 20 torture methods that most historians do not discuss in detail. You will discover why certain instruments were designed to keep victims alive and conscious for weeks of continuous agony. You will understand how medieval executioners calculated pain the way engineers calculate stress loads, with mathematical precision and professional pride. You will see evidence that some techniques were so sophisticated they exploited neurological responses that modern science only identified in the 20th century. Some of what you are about to hear was hidden deliberately because medieval authorities feared public reaction. Some was lost because the church destroyed records that made Christianity look complicit in atrocities. Some survived only in fragments, in personal diaries of witnesses, too horrified to stay silent, in medical texts that documented injuries without explaining how they occurred, in archaeological evidence that tells stories written records tried to erase. If you find yourself thinking that cannot be real or they would never go that far, remember that every torture method I will describe tonight is documented in primary sources. Every instrument has been found in archaeological excavations. Every technique has left physical evidence on skeletal remains that modern forensic scientists have analyzed and confirmed. Before we descend into this darkness together, if you appreciate content that reveals the hidden truths of history, consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell. Comment below telling me where in the world you are listening from. These stories deserve to be heard by everyone willing to confront what humanity is capable of when power operates without restraint. Let us begin with a torture method that most people have never heard of. A method so psychologically devastating that victims often went permanently insane before any physical damage occurred. You have heard of sleep deprivation as a torture technique. Modern interrogators use it. Governments have been condemned for it. But what medieval torturers discovered about sleeplessness went far beyond anything practiced today. The vigil was developed in Spanish monasteries during the 13th century, originally as a religious practice for monks seeking divine visions through extreme sleep denial. When the Inquisition formed in 1231, they recognized its potential and transformed spiritual discipline into systematic psychological destruction. A woman named Isabella de Cordoba became one of the first documented victims in 1247. She was accused of practicing Jewish rituals in secret, a capital offense in medieval Spain. The inquisitors wanted names. They wanted her entire network of secret Jews exposed. Isabella refused to confess because she was genuinely Catholic and had committed no crime. For the first 3 days, guards simply prevented her from sleeping by poking her with sticks whenever her eyes closed. This was the crude beginning. By day 4, Isabella was hallucinating, seeing demons in the corners of her cell, hearing voices that commanded her to confess. By day 7, she no longer recognized her own children when they were brought to visit her. By day 9, she confessed to crimes that were physically impossible, describing rituals that no actual Jewish practice included, naming people who did not exist, providing an elaborate fantasy that her broken mind generated to make the sleeplessness stop. But here is what made the vigil truly horrific. The inquisitors did not accept her confession. A confession obtained under torture was considered unreliable. So they let Isabella sleep for 2 days, waited for her mind to partially recover, and then asked her to confirm her confession voluntarily. When she recanted, explaining that she had invented everything to end the torment, they began the vigil again. This cycle repeated for 11 weeks. Sleep deprivation until psychosis, brief recovery, request for confirmation, recantation, more sleep deprivation. By the end, Isabella existed in a state that modern psychiatrists would recognize as permanent dissociative disorder. She confirmed her confession not because she was tortured into it, but because she genuinely no longer knew what was real. She had confessed so many times that the false memories had overwritten her actual memories. She believed she was guilty because her mind could no longer access the truth. The vigil was eventually refined to include sensory elements that accelerated breakdown. Victims were placed in cells with constant dripping water, irregular loud noises, flickering lights. The unpredictability prevented adaptation. The body could not adjust to a pattern because there was no pattern. Modern research has confirmed that unpredictable stress causes more psychological damage than predictable stress of greater intensity. Medieval torturers discovered this through experimentation 5 centuries before psychology existed as a discipline. Records from the Toledo Inquisition show that the vigil had an 89% confession rate, compared to 63% for physical torture alone. More importantly, vigil confessions were considered more legally valid because victims appeared to confess voluntarily after their recovery sleep. The technique was so effective that it spread across Europe within decades, adopted by secular authorities who recognized its power. What happened to Isabella de Cordoba? She was burned at the stake in 1248 after confirming her confession. Her children were taken by the church. Her property was seized. And her case became a template that would be applied to thousands of other victims over the following 3 centuries. But the vigil was considered a gentle method. What comes next was reserved for cases requiring more aggressive interrogation. The instrument looked almost elegant. Polished metal shaped like a pear, small enough to fit in a torturer's palm, with a screw mechanism at the base that caused 4 segments to separate when turned. Museums display these objects with clinical descriptions that fail to convey their actual purpose. The pear of anguish was inserted into body cavities. For men accused of homosexuality, it was rectal. For women accused of sexual crimes, it was vaginal. For those accused of heresy or blasphemy, it was oral. Once inserted, the torturer would slowly turn the screw, expanding the segments millimeter by millimeter until tissue tore. A court record from Lyon dated 1326 describes the interrogation of a woman named Marguerite accused of adultery. The document is clinical in its detail, recording that the pear was expanded over a period of 4 hours, with expansion halted whenever Marguerite lost consciousness and resumed once she was revived. The stated purpose was to extract the names of other adulterous women in the city. The actual purpose, evident from the document's gleeful tone, was punishment through suffering that would leave permanent damage. What makes this instrument particularly horrifying is its precision. The expansion was controlled through gear mechanisms that allowed adjustments of fractions of millimeters. Torturers could maintain a victim at the edge of tissue failure for extended periods, maximizing pain while preventing the merciful release of severe injury. Some variants included spikes on the expanding segments that would embed in flesh, making any movement by the victim cause additional damage. Modern gynecologists who have examined surviving peers have noted that the design exploits anatomical knowledge that was supposedly beyond